Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 150 awesome interviews in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. Listen to every episode on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in Alcoholics Anonymous. Today's an encore episode of my interview with Marcia G., originally released as episode 32 on June 21st, 2021. Marcia has been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous since May 2009. Today's show features my good friend Marcia G., who first got sober in 1990. But 8 years into that sobriety, her interest and involvement in AA started to wane. She went to fewer and fewer meetings, becoming increasingly convinced that her real problem was with drugs, not alcohol. By the time she slipped after 12 years, and during the early years of that relapse, her experimentation with social drinking seemed to be working. She believed herself no longer an alcoholic. Seduced by alcohol, her misguided belief soon deteriorated as she began a tragic downward slide back into the bottle. With a child and husband and previous experience with AA, she had lots of reasons to get sober again, but it took a 7-year beating by the disease before she barely made it back to AA. Thoroughly devastated, she got a sponsor and started to work the program in earnest. As the years multiplied, Marcia stayed in the middle of the program, going to lots of meetings, continuing service work, and sponsoring many women from a treatment hospital that she herself had attended. Today, Marcia is once again sober 12 years, but this period of sobriety is infused into every facet of her life. Marcia's story of long-term sobriety, interrupted by a lengthy slip, should be particularly instructive to anyone who's ever inhabited the outer regions of the program where alcohol's seduction seems the greatest. That Marcia made it back to even tell the story is a worthy demonstration of a power greater than herself. That she has anchored her sobriety to such a strong AA program by continuously doing the work is a fine encouragement to anyone struggling to get to the center. This is the 32nd interview in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast, so take a deep breath, exhale, and enjoy the next 60 minutes listening to my friend and AA sister, Marcia G.
Hi, my name is Marcia. I'm a drug addict and alcoholic.
Hi, Marcia. And that's what everybody else in the room says to you, isn't it?
Yes, it's always good to see you,
It's
Howard.
great to see you too, Marcia. You and I go back a long way, and we haven't seen each other in quite a while. I remember when we first met, though, years ago. You were coming back, I think, for your second and last sobriety date.
Yes, I was.
When was that?
That was May 24th of 2009 is my current sobriety date and my last sobriety date. And I want to tell you this, Howard. I've tried to tell you, but you may not really understand the impact that you have had on my recovery. Because when I first got back here, there's a special kind of crazy when you've had time in recovery and you go through a horrible relapse that I'm lucky to have lived through, and you come back again. It felt like you took me under your wing. And you shared your experience, strength, and hope on a very basic level that was easy for me to digest. And you were critical the first several years of me being back.
Well,
really.
thank you for that sentiment. In return, what I will say about you is I noticed from the first time I ever met you, you were like a sponge in that room. You were soaking it all up. And when you came up to me afterwards on a few occasions and said, what you said today really made a difference, I always think about, well, what was it that I said? But you never know who you're touching in meetings, and I know over the years you've touched an awful lot of people with your story. And your story is an important story for people to hear, because you had, how many years of sobriety did you have before you slipped?
12 years, yeah.
12 years. Were they all in AA, or how did they look?
Well, actually, I got sober in CA, but, same 12 steps, and I really identified as a as a cocaine addict, but there was always alcohol involved
Sure.
too. And Cocaine Anonymous says it's total abstinence.
Sure.
So I just didn't equate alcohol as the worst part of my addictive personality. And so I quit around that and maintained total abstinence. But what happened is that, I got all the blessings, all the wonderful things came into my life, and I stopped doing what got me sober to begin with. And it is not only cunning, baffling, and powerful, but it's seductive.
Seductive, yeah.
And so the beginning of the relapse happened because I was in a car wreck and was in chronic pain and was given narcotics. And I even told my doctors I was a recovering alcoholic, but I tell you, there wasn't a whole lot of recovery going on at that point because I was active in 12-step recovery to about 8 years. I was married to a licensed chemical dependency counselor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When we both relapsed, he had 17 years and I had 12. That's give or take because you're not consciously thinking, for me anyway, that, okay, here goes, I'm in relapse.
Right.
I guess you do if you take a drink.
Right.
But when you're taking prescription pills, where is that line when I stopped taking them as prescribed and started taking them by the handful?
I see.
But I'm pretty clear that I remember thinking I just celebrated 12 years of sobriety and I was sober at that point. So at one point I don't remember consciously thinking I've got 13 years. So it was somewhere between 12 and 13 that the relapse started.
Wow.
And I actually didn't drink any alcohol for 15 years. And I remember in that seductive relapse period thinking, well, I'm not drinking. I'm not drinking. It's insane. Yeah. The insanity had returned a long time before I ever started abusing pills because I believe that the insanity returns when I'm not treating my disease. Yeah. And it takes AA and the 12 steps and a relationship with God to treat the disease.
Yeah, I get that. Well, I wanted to unpack that just a little bit. Usually there are certain things that people let up doing or actually stop doing on their way to a slip. Can you give me an idea what went first and what went next and how the dominoes fell before you took that drink?
I can tell you, I just got chills on my arm because when I go back there, and I probably need to do it more often because it's seductive. That's the perfect word for it. It's such a seductive process. And it's like the frog in the water that, the heat turns up slowly. I know I was about 8 years sober. I had a toddler at home. I had a full-time job. My career was taking off. I was experiencing all these wonderful benefits of recovery. And I was in a strong marriage with another recovering person. And I think one thing is I wasn't using my sponsor. So that was probably the first thing that fell to the wayside was the sponsor. And then it was meetings. I just was too busy to get to meetings. And he was going to meetings, so that was kind of enough for me. The insanity had already clearly returned.
Vicarious meetings you were in, I get it.
Yes. And let me tell you, that happens I see that as a person in the field. I watched him begin to think that his vocation was his treatment. And that's, even if you're in the field and around it all day long, you still need to address your own program.
Yeah.
So we were both on really shaky ground at that point. And then both had these injuries. And he blew out both of his knees and had repeated surgeries, actually trying to replace the cartilage. So we both were in situations where narcotics were required. Now, I know that today, if I got in a situation where I needed narcotics for something, it would have to be something pretty severe.
Yeah, sure.
And I think if you're in the middle of AA, that can be handled.
Right.
If your doctors know, your sponsor knows, everybody around you knows what's going on, and it's for a short duration. But I was in a position at that point without being active in AA, without a sponsor. That was way too dangerous. That was like playing Russian roulette. That I either had no business taking narcotics or I had to reinvest myself in a program of recovery to get through that. And I didn't.
At that point, you were not reaching out. Were people reaching in? I mean, how long did it take before your sponsor gave up on calling you or hearing from you? How long was it before you stopped hearing from people in the program who you were friends with? What did that look like?
I stayed away. I started sliding away at about 8 years. I can tell you that I think from year 9 to 10, I think I may have gone to 1 or 2 meetings. I know at 10 years, I think I went to pick up the chip. That's it. And I remember my 12-year chip my husband picked up for me. It took a 4-year period from year 8 to year 12. And let me tell you what, it's real easy to disconnect from AA over that period of time. One other thing is that the crowd that I ran with in the 12-step program that I was in, I didn't have the one old timer I was close to had died. Died sober, but he had died. So I wasn't connected to a lot of long-term sobriety, which is important. Sure. I think that's important for us. And so I wasn't accountable to anybody in 12-step recovery. And I wonder if that was part of the process of relapse. There was a point I remember thinking, I am never going to drink again. I really don't need AA anymore. I'm just never going to drink again. My husband's an LCDC. You know, I'm not going to ever drink again.
Yeah, he'll watch out for you.
Yeah, or I'm a mother now. There's no way. Not recognizing that to never drink again, there are things I have to do to position myself to never drink again. And that's AA and the program and everything that's prescribed by the program.
So that's starting at 8 years. 8 years until 12 years when your husband brought home that chip. Were you sober enough to be able to claim that chip in honesty at 12 years, or were you drinking and using during that period of time?
No.
So you were sober right up to the point at which you slipped.
I was sober. I had very little recovery.
Right.
I had sobriety.
Okay.
I had abstained from drugs and alcohol up until about 12 years.
The reason I ask that is because I have had some guests on the show who were actively still drinking while they were going to meetings. They met the membership requirement, of course. They had the desire to stop. They just couldn't. And then there are those who can define a hard date in time when they took the next drink when the relapse started. So once 12 years hit, what was the process of slipping looking like for you at that time? Were you heading down further, or were you just at the end of the road?
I think the insanity that had started very mildly at about 8 years was where my priorities were. I was prioritizing my business life over any spiritual life. So when my spiritual life starts taking a back seat to other things, my connection with God is not even forefront in my mind. And so when that car wreck happened and my doctors, knowing that I'm a sober alcoholic, getting that warning, taking the narcotics wakes up the dragon or the whatever. It does.
I've heard that.
And I didn't have the tools within my reach to do what I needed to do to stay sober through that whole process. So it was just that much easier to just succumb to what was going on.
You had gone from a dry alcoholic to becoming a narcotics addict?
Yes.
Did you fall into the mire of that particular addiction, and what did that look like?
Oh, yeah. And that's what my relapse was for 7 years. And so the first several years were pills. And the pills were from doctors who knew I was in recovery. And then I was still in a lot of pain. And so I thought, I'm getting new doctors. And I'm not telling them I'm recovered. They're under prescribing. And possibly they were. And then I began getting doctors online. And it was happening to both of us. So there were, I could tell you, relapse is very ugly. Relapse amongst two people that previously had a significant amount of sobriety is a horrible thing to experience. So we were spending thousands of dollars every month with these pill mills. And so that we struggled with that for probably 2 or 3 years. And we got off all of that. And then there was this distinct time, and it was in October of 2004, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
We'd gotten off the pills, and I remember sitting on the bed and looking at my husband and saying, I think I'm going to have some champagne at New Year's. And I still had not drank. And he said, I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, you know what? I think I'm a drug addict. I don't think I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, okay.
And I said, I believe that I just need to stay away from drugs. Sure. And he said, well, I don't know. And I didn't run out and drink. I waited until New Year's, and I think that was my mind or my alcoholism tricking me, because I probably was thinking, see, a real alcoholic would go out and get alcohol and not make a thoughtful decision like you're making.
Right.
And New Year's came, New Year's Eve, I had a glass and a half of champagne, and the sky did not fall in. So I thought, I'm not an alcoholic. And so I started drinking. And I started drinking maybe a couple of times a month. And it was so seductive because I thought, I'm not an alcoholic. And I can remember one time in particular, I was visiting some friends in Jacksonville, Florida. And we went out to dinner or something, and I ordered this beautiful martini. And it was a hypnotique martini. And I don't even drink martinis, but I drank this martini, and then over the course of dinner, and then I ordered a second one. I drank maybe half of it, and I pushed it away, and I said, no, that's I've had enough. And I remember thinking in that moment, I'm not an alcoholic. An alcoholic would not have done that. And it was so, again, seductive to me that it lulled me into thinking, must have been drugs all along. And so this actually, unbelievably, because I don't think this applies to a lot of alcoholics, this went on for about a year. I drank like what appeared to be a normal person. And then it started getting, have a rough night one night and just think, oh, wow, that was just kind of an off night. And it's a blur of how long it took. But I can tell you that in that 7-year relapse, the first 2 years were pills. Then I started drinking kind of normally. And then the last several years of that relapse were horrible. The last 2 years in particular were excruciating. And we were both lucky to live through this. As a matter of fact, my son is lucky to have both of his parents alive. We could both be dead now. And it's a miracle that we both got sober at the same time. We split up, and within 3 months, he got sober, and 10 days later, I got sober. Kind of not even independent of each other. And we both just celebrated 12 years of sobriety.
12 years of sobriety from the alcohol and the drug, from everything.
Yeah.
I wanted to, and I appreciate you going into such detail. It really paints quite an incredible picture there, especially what you're saying about the seduction of the drink. I want to just quickly revisit what you said about the doctors. Did you have those expectations of your doctor? Did you think when he prescribed for you, knowing that you were an addict, that somehow he was tacitly approving of you being able to take these drugs?
No, I don't think so. What I really told myself at the time is that when I told them, because there was a neurologist and another doctor and a pain management doctor, that because I told them I was a recovering alcoholic, that they were under-prescribing.
Oh, okay.
And so I used that as a justification for getting new doctors and not telling them about my history.
Okay.
I used it as a justification to have multiple doctors that didn't know the other was prescribing for me. That's because it moved into that area.
Sure.
I knew that this was my
You
choice.
knew it,
And I knew my alcoholism just, it was delusional.
Yeah.
That I got to the point where I would have a conversation saying, I don't think I'm an alcoholic anymore. I mean, how can you spend 12 years sober, 8 of them very active in AA, and then later on, and when you have empirical data that shows what an alcoholic you are, and you reflected on that, and then suddenly say, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. That's That's insanity.
And that's real denial, too. So at 12 years, you picked up the drink.
No, at 15 years, I picked up the drink. 12 years was the pills.
12 years was the pills. So you said we quit the pills. What was that process like? I mean, people who are really addicted, to say we just quit, there's more to it than that. What did that look like?
You know, there's such a physical aspect to drug addiction because your body becomes physically addicted to it. You have to progress pretty far in alcoholism to be addicted to ethyl alcohol,
right.
Because that's what causes tremors and all that. I mean, DTs. But I got myself to that point, too. I think everybody's body around drug addiction reacts and adapts differently. For some reason, I didn't have real bad withdrawals to the drugs. So, because it would happen on a monthly basis. You'd get prescriptions for a certain amount, you'd eat them by the handful, and you're going to run out.
Right.
And even with multiple doctors, you've got to time those prescriptions. But my ex-husband experienced it very badly.
He did.
So every time he ran out, he would get it was like the flu until our prescriptions came by FedEx.
Wow.
So stopping the pills was not a difficult thing for me.
Good.
And also because I've always been a binger, all or nothing.
Right.
I'm going to either drink everything and just keep drinking, or I'm going to stop for a period of time. It's staying stopped was probably the most difficult thing for me. Until the very end of the relapse, I was not a daily drinker. Maybe the last 6 months of the relapse, I was a daily drinker.
You mentioned being a binger. When did that start for you? What do you remember about your early life that might have pointed you to becoming a binger?
Well, it was the first time I drank.
Really?
And this is something kind of funny, too. My sponsor, and I have the same sponsor since you and I met 12 years ago, and she is a remarkable woman. She would share in meetings that the first time she drank, she was 12 years old, and it was the same night she took drugs for the first time. And I remember thinking, because, you know, we are judgy alcoholics. I remember thinking when I was early on thinking, God, she started at 12 years old. Because the first time I drank was in 6th grade. And it took me a few years to go, wait a minute, that's 12 years old. I didn't realize that 12-year-olds are in 6th grade.
Yeah.
So, yes, I can remember drinking Boone's Farm.
Yeah.
And yes, and passing out in the front yard of our house. So I'm sure my parents were very proud, and the neighbors were probably aghast. But we were like preteens, and somebody got a hold of this stuff, and everybody else was like taking a sip and got a little tipsy, and Marcia's passed out because I was going to do more than anybody else. And that's the pattern of my living in my disease when I'm in the disease. So I remember my 20s, it was a thing about stopping at Memorial Day and staying stopped until Labor Day. So it was like an abstinence period. And I've always had a very strong will and strong willpower. But I knew what was going to happen on Labor Day. You know, I knew, and I had my drug dealers and the alcohol, everything lined up by end of July. You know, there was no telling what was going to happen. Once again, I think the seduction of the disease. Like, nobody can call me an alcoholic because I stopped for 3 months every year.
So you started when you were, I guess, going into middle school. Was that a regular occurrence, or was it an every now and then type thing? What did that look like?
No, it was actually pretty infrequent. I think that the 12-year-old episode was illustrative of my addicted personality, that I had to do all of it. I had to do more than anybody else, and I had to take it to the extreme. Then I think the rest of middle school was, you know, smoking pot occasionally. And actually I was kind of known as the girl that didn't smoke pot because I kind of stepped away from that. But in high school, now I was very young when I graduated. I was 16, so I was always hanging out with people older than me. My best friend was, when I was 15, was 18. So the crowd that I was hanging out with were much older. And in high school, it became a pretty regular thing, drinking and taking drugs on the weekend. Everybody was doing it, but I seemed to do it more. I did seem to have a high tolerance for the amount that I could imbibe. That was thinking I was having fun. And then my 20s were really a lot of drugs and alcohol, but alcohol was always like on the side. And I drank alcohol so that I could use more cocaine.
I get it. Yeah.
And when I got sober the first time, it was 1990, and I was 30 years old. I was a party girl. I was a party girl that hit a brick wall. I will share a story that is very profound to me. But I moved back from LA. I'd lived there for 5 years, and I had been in town and it was the end of a really dysfunctional, toxic relationship. And I moved back here. I just got into town. I dropped stuff off at my parents' house, and I went on a 3-day binge. And at the end of the 3 days, I just was in that horrible, horrible place of shame and guilt. And I had spent all of that time, from the time I was 12 until I was 30 years old, doing everything I could to never have to assign myself the title of alcoholic. I would play all sorts of tricks I am not going to be that. I had an older brother who was in recovery and didn't really like him too much. And I didn't want to be that.
Yeah, I get
and so I had a person out in LA. He was in the film industry, and I had been running with him before I moved back. And he was always making fun of his ex-wife because she was in recovery. And he said, oh, yeah, she's baking cookies for those people down there at AA. And we'd go, I remember sitting around with him drinking margaritas at this Mexican restaurant, as we're getting drunk, that the poor people in AA can't drink. And so after that 3-day binge, I'm sitting there and with all this guilt and all this remorse. Now, I didn't call my brother because that was too close. But I reached out and I called the modeling agency in LA, and I asked for Patricia. She was a model there, and that was back in the days of voicemails. And no, this was an answer. It was an agency answering service. And so I said, if you please tell her that Marcia called, and tell her that I need some help. I think that's what I said. I could use her help. And about an hour later, my phone rings. Now, understand that this was back when you paid for long distance. And so she calls me from LA, and she said, I'm looking for Marcia, and I'm returning your call. And I said, I used to run around with your ex-husband, and I think I'm an alcoholic. And that was the first time in my life I'm getting choked up saying this. It's the first time in my life I had ever said I'm an alcoholic. And by running around with your ex-husband, I actually used something a little cruder because we were doing more than running around. And I think that I was trying to set it up for her to say, who are you, and offend her. And she said, tell me what's going on. I'm at tears right now, reliving this. That's what she said.
Yeah.
She said, tell me what's going on. She had no idea who I was.
Wow.
And so it just started spilling out of me. And we were on the phone for probably an hour at least before she said, well, why don't you go to a meeting? And I'd say, no. I just want to talk here. I just want to talk. And on that day, we were probably on the phone off and on for about 4 hours. And I ended up that day, she called my brother. My brother set an appointment for me to go down and get an assessment. And I ended up going into treatment, and that picked up a chip, and I stayed sober for 12 years.
That was the 12 years that you had before the 7-year slip.
Yes.
Wow. So you had that kind of story at the beginning of your first period of sobriety there, but yet at 8 years to 12 years, none of that history was sufficient to make you realize once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic?
I tell you, it was so much about self. I think I was buying into the success I was experiencing. That, I've got this. Thank you for what you've done for me, AA, but I'm going to go because I'm busy. I've got this. I'm very important and very
Wow.
busy, and it was ego. It started happening slowly over, not needing a sponsor anymore, not really needing meetings, and you start detaching from this incredible gift that we have in AA. It's such a gift that we're given. It's so startling to me that I could lose sight of that.
What happens is we take our eye off the ball, and then once we've taken our eye off the ball, we start taking our eye off other things too. I get that. The 7 years that you spent out there, it sounds like maybe they started out okay, but at what point did things start to deteriorate within that 7 years?
Well, it was the last 2 years were horrible.
Yeah.
It was not good before the last 2 years, but around the last 2 year mark, my father died. And I was very close to my father. And, I was not in any kind of shape to really process this tremendous loss.
Sure.
So he lived a wonderful, beautiful life. He died at 91. He was an incredible man.
Yeah.
But I was so self-absorbed at that point. You would have thought I was the only person that's ever lost a parent. And the way that I coped was to just pour lots of drugs and alcohol on it. And I think it was inevitable that when I was already using drugs and alcohol, we'd gotten beyond that point where it looked normal, that something that was devastating was going to take me completely out. And so those last 2 years were lots of black eyes, we lost everything, and because we destroyed it.
Now, when you say we, you're talking about yourself and your ex?
Yes. We destroyed a almost 20-year marriage. And I guess the thing that I have the most regret about is that my son was born to two sober, recovering people. And so the first many years of his life, probably until about 8 years old, he was with recovering parents. And then he watched this slowly become more and more insane. And thankfully, he didn't experience a lot of things that I hear others in our fellowship share stories about, what the kids went through. And so he didn't suffer that greatly, but I know he saw his mother very loaded at times. And not only seeing me that way, but understanding that he had very stable parents and a stable relationship, and that all stopped. And so I think that it's almost more difficult for a child to go from one to the other, as opposed to living your whole life in that chaos.
Yeah, and at 8 years old, you also have in your mind that what's going wrong within the household or within the family is somehow your fault.
Yes.
And was he the only child?
Yes, he was.
So it would be even easier for him to feel like, why did my parents have to act that way? And you blame yourself.
And why isn't it like it used to be?
So from 8 to 13, he was living through this relapse with you and your husband. At what point did you and your husband get divorced within that relapse?
We separated 3 months before we both got sober. We separated in February, and then in May, we both got sober. And I didn't know, well, I think he told me he was getting sober, and I didn't really believe him, and then I got sober. And it's remarkable, because it's tough to have a period, to have time, to have a significant amount of time, relapse and get sober again. We see people struggle with this all the time. It's a club you don't want to join.
Oh, yeah.
And so the fact that both of us are sober again, both at 12 years sober, is pretty miraculous. I mean, it is a miracle that my son has both of his parents alive.
And so what's ironic about that, though, is that it happened 3 months before you guys got sober. It seems like, what would have happened if you had gotten sober 3 months before that, or gotten sober before you split up?
Well, here's the thing. It's like the saying we have about pickle can't go back to being a cucumber.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that when too much happens, you just can't go back. And while I am very grateful for his recovery. I'm very grateful for my recovery. And we established a wonderful friendship and supportive friendship of each other for years. This was whatever God wanted to have happen. This was what was supposed to happen, I believe. Yeah.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying listening to my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the 3rd and 4th editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the 3rd and 4th editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Have a free listen to Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon. While you're there, treat yourself to another audiobook I produced, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a comfortable, meaningful, and engaging way to listen to the Big Book, anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. You're going to love it. And we're back. You got sober again. What was it like coming back in, and how about some of the people and relationships that you had previously? What did those relationships look like when you got sober again and came back into AA?
You mean my AA relationships?
Yeah, your AA relationships.
Okay. Well, this is interesting because I didn't have to deal with what a lot of people coming back deal with in seeing people that they knew before. I didn't, there were only a handful of people that I have run into over the years that knew me the first time around, because the core of my recovery the first time was in a different fellowship.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I get it.
So I would, and I have a pretty distinctive voice, but I can remember a couple of times in meetings that I would share, and I'd see somebody's head whip around and look at me because they'd recognize the voice from a long time ago. But I do want to point out that this sober birthday that I celebrated this past month was, to me, I know we all only have today, but this milestone was 12 years. And I was 12 years sober once before. Just like when I celebrated 7 years this time, I had a 7-year relapse. So that 7 years was very meaningful, that I was sober again for as long as the relapse happened. So now I'm 12 years, nice bookends, 12 years in the beginning and 12 years now. It's been 31 years since I got sober the first time. Minus that 7 year, what do you want to call that? That was 7 years of hell. It was excruciating. But I will also tell you that had I not gone through that, and I'm so grateful that God saw fit for me to live through it, I wouldn't have the recovery that I have today. I think that I'm just hard-headed enough. And I hear stories of others who have, and there's someone that we both know closely that goes to our meeting. She talks about having veered away from AA at about, 10 years and staying away for a number of years, but she never drank. And she got to a point of insanity where she thought, I got to go back to AA. And I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Because my solution to the insanity was, well, I'm just going to have a drink around that. And I've heard that from several people and I hope the lessons that can be taken from these kinds of stories is how dangerous it is to get on the edge of the herd or step away from AA. This alcoholic right here needs to be planted inside AA. And for me to stay sober, and that's the goal, for God to keep me sober, I need to be in the middle of AA.
When you came back, would you say that you came back with the idea of getting yourself planted in the middle, or did you come back on the fringes and work your way into the middle?
I was so desperate and so broken when I came back. In 1990, when I made that phone call and said for the first time, I'm an alcoholic, I think I'm an alcoholic, I was in a bad place. But in 2009, when I checked into the hospital, I was so much further down. And it was bad enough in 1990 to get sober, to ask for help. But it got so much worse. I lived the progression of this disease. And it took me to a place, I was experiencing DTs and blackouts, and it took me to a place that was so dark and alone and isolated that it's crushing to think of it now. It's crushing.
Yeah, I can imagine. You know, I was curious. I just want to make sure I have the sequence of things worked out here. Did you, when you hit that bottom, did you come right back into AA, or did you go into inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment and then AA or concurrent with AA? What was the sequence of those events?
On May 24th of 2009, I called my psychiatrist, who is actually a treatment professional. And I said, I think I need help.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had not spent any time in those 7 years thinking, gee, I got to go back to AA. You know what I thought? I thought I needed a divorce. I thought I needed, I needed all of y'all to leave me alone. Yeah. I thought I needed all this stuff. I would not allow my mind to think that it was drugs or alcohol or anything that was ruining my life. I thought it was everybody else. Y'all are just messing with me.
I see.
And I had this distinct moment of clarity.
Yeah.
And enough presence of mind to call him. And I said, I think I need help. And he was a physician at hospital. And he got me checked in that day. But I will tell you that they have AA meetings there. That alumni group helped save my life. And I, as soon as there was an AA meeting for me to attend, I attended that meeting. I was only in the hospital for 4 days and then immediately started going to the club that you and I love so dearly.
Yeah, it seems to me that there are a number of people from that class of yours that are still sober. And you guys did a lot of service work.
Yes. We did. For the first 5 years of this period of sobriety, I was at hospital for 2 meetings on every Friday, a meeting on Sunday, and 2 meetings on Mondays. And some of them were AA meetings. The other ones were called alumni meetings, where we would go onto the unit and briefly introduce ourselves and what it is we're talking about. And it was really a question and answer. This was the detox unit. And some of these people had never been exposed to AA at all. And that's where I met my sponsor. Was the first meeting, the first AA meeting that I went to while I was inpatient. My sponsor was alumni that was coming back in, and I actually told her, I said, I need a sponsor. I need a sponsor, but I got to have somebody who's got a long time, because I had a lot of time before, And she said, oh, well, I've only got a year and a half. And I said, oh, okay, well, give me your number anyway. This is how full of myself I was. And so the next day,
I get it, yeah.
She shared this at my first sobriety birthday. I didn't remember this, because the next day I called her and I said, listen, I prayed about it and I'm going to let you sponsor me. And so she shared about that at my first sobriety birthday. I went, now that sounds like me.
I'm sure it was quite a gift for her, though, Marcia. I mean, isn't it always?
Well, but I'll tell you that, and she and I marvel at this many times, it's clear that this was God's hand was in putting us together. And we have grown together so much. And she has been such a guide for me. And recovery is such an amazing journey. And it's such a gift.
It really is.
And it gives me the tools. I will tell you this. I'm not even sure if you know this, Howard, but 2 years ago, my sister committed suicide.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And probably the most devastating thing that's ever happened in my life. We were only 18 months apart, and we were very close. And there was such feelings of abandonment, betrayal, because we were supposed to grow old together. We were supposed to be, we would talk about being on the porch in our rocking chairs together. Regardless of what happened to the men in our lives, she and I were going to be together at the end. And so, but because of AA, And because of the tools that I have from AA and the people that I know in AA and what I've been taught to do when I'm in excruciating pain, I was able to walk through that fully aware and to feel every one of those crushing feelings.
Wow.
And it's hard for me to say this, but actually grow from the experience. It's hard to say I grew from that experience, but and Greg helped me through that. We did a lot of work around it. And had I not been fully invested in AA when this happened, I would have drank myself to death. Or taken enough pills to kill myself accidentally. And I will also say that in my recovery, there was a point when I moved my son and I into my mother's home because she had to have help. So for the last 4 years of her life, I was caring for her on a daily basis. She had a lot of dementia. She needed our help, and it was the biggest gift of my life, besides my sobriety, that I was able to do that for her.
Wow.
And that I was... Had I not been sober, I would have never done anything like that. I wouldn't have been able to be there for her. And that's another gift that this program has given me.
Yeah, isn't it extraordinary, Marcia, that there are two situations that you just mentioned that would, at another period of our lives, be considered the perfect opportunity and the justifiable reason why we drank or used drugs. And instead, because of the program, we turn those things into some of the greatest gifts we've ever been given. That to me is nothing short of astonishing that you were able to come through those.
Yeah, on my own, I'm too self-absorbed and self-obsessed to see anything but what about me? Yeah. This is happening to me rather than the check I get on my perspective because of AA.
During this period of time, so we're talking about something that happened at 10 years. We're talking about that 4-year period of taking care of your mother. These are two incredible opportunities for growth and that sort of thing. In terms of passing that on to others, what has sponsoring other people or being of service in the program looked like for you during your 12-year tenure?
Of those things that we do on a daily basis, I can't say one is more important than the other, because if I do that, then I'm going to pay more attention to the ones that I think are most important. And they all are equally important. Praying and meditating, going to meetings, reading the literature, reading the big book, serving others. And for me, personal service, sponsoring, has been critical to my recovery. The first time I was sober, I did service on a group level. I didn't want to fool with the nonsense of being a sponsor. I never sponsored anybody. This time, sponsoring women and having a sponsor has been critical in my recovery. Because of my association in the alumni group, I have, and this is not to boast or to exaggerate, but I would probably be asked by 3 women a week to sponsor them. And I would say yes to every one of them. So over a period of 5 years, I probably said yes to being a sponsor 500 times, easily.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And whether I probably only got phone calls, maybe, let's say that first phone call, 300 women. And then more than one phone call, maybe 200, something like that. It just keeps dropping down, you know. And then I think I've probably taken, I wish I'd written it down, but I've probably taken maybe 50 women through the steps. And today I sponsor 6 women.
Yeah.
And I probably should position myself better to be available for newcomers, because I think that's where some of our best growth comes. But I did some step work with a sponsor the other day, and it just invigorates me.
Yeah, it really is. It's invigorating, and the great thing about it is that when you've got good sponsees who you've taken through the steps and who you know are on good, sound footing, that whenever you do see those new people, go ahead, when some guy comes up to me or I see somebody new in the program, I will call over one of my sponsees that's in the same meeting I'm in and say, come over here, you guys, and I'll put them together. and tell the guy who needs a sponsor to talk to my sponsee because I think it would be a good match. That keeps me from feeling bad that I can't sponsor every single man who asks me to sponsor them because, the numbers you just used are astonishing. Of the 500, maybe 50, so we're talking about a 10%, which is good in our circles, isn't it?
That's just the ones that went through the steps. I have 6 women that I actively sponsor. I have other women that I have sponsored that I see are still around. I have women that I have sponsored that didn't stay sober when I was their sponsor, but then got their footing in another way. Because I think a lot of this that we can't discount is the planting of the seeds.
Yeah.
A person just might not be ready or might not be willing when I'm working with them.
Yeah.
And then they might go on and have experiences that then get them to a place of being willing enough to do whatever it takes. And and I'm grateful for anything that I may have contributed towards their path of recovery.
Yeah, I get that.
And you and I both know if you hang around here long enough, you see people die. We see people die. And I had, right around the time that my sister, not long after my sister committed suicide, a sponsee that a woman that I was sponsoring, died in a horrible car crash, alcohol related. And she was someone who had 7 years at one time and that had been out for many years and came back and was really struggling and asked me to be her sponsor. And I said, I just think we're too close. I think we talked about it. We prayed about it. I said, okay, we'll give this a shot. And it wasn't long after that she was in this car wreck. It was heartbreaking. But, I think what we have to learn, and I know I had to learn this early on. I know the first couple of years of sponsoring is I wanted him to do it just like me, because if you do it, you're going to, this is how you stay. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's about, I've got to allow, all I can do is share my experience. I am not that powerful. And all I can do is share my experience and tell you what worked for me.
Yeah. What they say in business is leading from behind, right? Trying to help them get to the right spot. So these women, it sounds to me, the 6 women that you're actively sponsoring right now, all the other women you've sponsored, those are terrific gifts of sobriety in your life. And of course, we talked about a couple of the really tough things that turned into gifts. Could you tell me about a couple things that were just exceptional gifts that occurred within your sobriety during this past 12 years?
Well, I don't know if this would be like, because I don't look at recovery as if, gee, look, I got this because I'm sober, like I got a reward or something. But I will tell you that it was right after I celebrated 1 year sober. It was kind of a gift. It was probably the first spiritual experience that I clearly identified as being spiritual. My son was sick. He had it seemed like the stomach flu. And it had been going on for about 3 days. And so I called the doctor, but it wasn't constant. He just was very lethargic and stuff. So I called the doctor, made an appointment for a Friday. And by Friday, he was feeling pretty bad. And I get him to the doctor, and he was like really, I had to help him into the doctor's office. We got in there, and as soon as we went into the exam room, I said, take a urine specimen, because in case the doctor wants to do any tests, just take a urine specimen, and then he can go lay down. And so he gave a urine specimen. He laid down, and the doctor came in, and it was not our regular doctor. And he said, what's going on? I said, well, he's been vomiting, but it's, it's not like all the time. And and I said, and he's very thirsty. And he looked at me and he said, is there any diabetes in your family? I said, no. And he said, what about his dad's family? I said, no. And he said, that's just a Houston heat. It's just he's got stomach flu. And he starts writing me a prescription. And so I will tell you that I've never been paranoid about diabetes. It's not one of those diseases that I think are going to get me. And so as he's walking out the door, handing me this prescription, I said, could you just check him for diabetes? Because he already has a specimen that, and the doctor said, okay, I'll do that, but I can assure you it's not diabetes. And he walked out of the room. And he comes back in about 5 minutes later, and he said, I need you to take him directly to the emergency room and don't stop anywhere. And are you able to do that? Because if not, we'll call an ambulance. And I said, is it diabetes? And he said, I don't know, but I know his blood sugar is at a critical level. And so we went straight to the emergency room, and the treatment team came rushing around him, and they wheeled him off. And I remember I looked up and I said, I was talking to God. I said, you know, I could end up very angry about this. And this feeling came over me. Just, I could feel it. This immediate thought of, thank God I'm sober. Thank God I'm sober. Because it was a Friday at noon. It would have been,
wow.
God's hand was all over this. First, that I had him leave the urine specimen. Second, that I thought to mention the thirst. That I said to the doctor, check him for diabetes. Because had I been drinking, I would have been more than happy to take that prescription, drop him off at home, run to Walgreens, grab a couple of bottles of wine, and drop off that prescription. And with a diabetic, he could have gone into severe diabetic crisis, which is really what he was in. He could have died. And so God, while it was not a wonderful thing that my son had the onset of diabetes, but that's been his own journey and his own path, and there's growth in that. But the fact that God had that happen when I had a year of sobriety, so that I was present enough to be able to handle this like a good mother would. That was a gift.
Wow.
And that was one of the first times that that was a spiritual experience. Clearly, I felt God telling me, you're sober, so you can do this.
Wow, that's really wonderful. To have that kind of experience and be able to look back on it as what it really was, and that was a spiritual experience, is amazing. So is it juvenile diabetes, or what kind of diabetes is it?
It's juvenile diabetes.
Juvenile,
so he is...
takes insulin every day?
Yeah, he has a pump. He's like bionic, and
cool.
he lives a completely normal life, and it was a difficult process through the teen years. But once again, I was sober and was able to be of support to him.
So what you've managed to do in the last hour, Marcia, is lay out a lot of different things that somebody who's new in sobriety, listening to them, wondering, will I be able to stay sober if this or that terrible thing happened in my life? If I stay sober for X number of years, will the gifts keep coming, or will things just level out and become boring? You've painted such a beautiful picture of long-term sobriety after a period of real crisis, preceded by a period of, well, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And you've done it brilliantly, and I can't thank you enough for laying it all out in that way. It's always fascinating to me to do these interviews, because it gives me an opportunity to get to know the whole story of people. I mean, you and I don't know how many hundreds of meetings you and I have been in over the years, but you get to know people maybe 3 to 5 minutes at a time, and trying to put all the bits and pieces together, which is why I asked some of the questions about what was the sequence and what were the years, and because it all gets jumbled up. But in fact, it wasn't until just now when you mentioned about Kevin having that shared experience of having gone out and for a period of time that I recalled that was his story.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful story. And
well, I tell you what, I just want to add one thing here. I believe that God is the one that did it brilliantly, not me. The most that I have done is and I haven't done it well, but get myself out of the way so God could do what he was supposed to do to begin with, that I kept fighting against.
Exactly.
But I think I would say that it's not even, and I think you've noticed that in my story, is that the gifts do not look like gifts, and they're not like my son's diabetes, like my sister's suicide. Like the gift is that I can survive that without having to inebriate myself or anesthetize myself with drugs and alcohol. That no matter what happens in life, it's not about avoiding the storms. It's about being calm within the storm.
Yeah, I love that. You've said that a number of times over the years, and I just love that saying. The other thing that I was thinking while you were saying that was that the real gift, and I tell people who are going through difficult times, the real gift is in the future for you. And that gift is going to be when somebody somewhere hears about how you got through it, and that gives them just the right amount of hope for them to get through it. That's where that gift is, because we in AA are kind of in the life-saving business. And your story today, my guess is that there will be people who listen to it and identify with it. There will be people who listen to it and say, gee, I never considered that. And there will be other people who listen to it and say, gee, I didn't know AA would be that interesting or fun or rewarding. And if any of those things happen, I'm a believer that if even just one person is helped by you sharing your story, and I guarantee you more than one will, it will have all been worthwhile. And God's made this whole process possible, just you and I knowing each other and being friends. I love you. You're a beautiful person.
I love you too, Howard.
And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for drawing me out with thoughtful questions. Thank you for everything that you've contributed to my own recovery, my own sobriety. You're a jewel in my life. I so appreciate you.
Thank you. It's been a real gift to me to be able to be part of your life and to have your trust and friendship.
And you have it.
Thanks once again.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? It's another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.